So now we're going to go over adverb clauses. And adverb clauses are probably the easiest of the dependent clauses, and the easiest of the clauses out of all of them is the independent clause. And we've already seen one example of this. Rex barked when the mailman came. The dependent clause here, the one that cannot stand alone, is when the mailman came. We also see that this dependent clause answers the question when, and so it's an adverb. How do we diagram this? When here is what's called a subordinating conjunction. We're going to look at that a little more in detail shortly. But it is a conjunction. And if we remember from the earlier sections of the book, we had coordinating conjunctions, which were joined together, which would join different words or phrases or sentences with a dotted line. And so we're going to do the same thing here with when. We join the independent clause Rex barked with when, and notice that we're joining it to the verb because it's an adverb, right? It's the whole clause is an adverb, and so the whole clause is modifying barked. And so when is our subordinating conjunction? Mailman is the subject. Obviously, there's a the there where she just doesn't put it because we should know it by now, but there would be a the there. Came is the verb. And so this is how you're going to diagram an adverb clause. It's very simple. Now, if we look at these examples that she gives, we have 5. And ask yourself, when we look at each one of these, where is the dependent clause? So Rex barked after the mailman came, after the mailman left. First, we have the independent clause, which should be easily identifiable because it can stand alone completely. It doesn't need anything else. Rex barked can be a complete sentence. But then there is something that requires something else. So after the mailman left is not a complete sentence. We're expecting something. Rex barked. Notice that in this example and the one when the mailman came, there are no commas. So when you have a dependent clause, a adverb clause after the independent clause, there are no commas necessary. What question does after the mailman left answer? Well, it answers when. And so we know that this is an adverb. Also, after here is a subordinating conjunction. The easiest way to tell an adverb clause is to look for the subordinating conjunction. This is because, as we're going to see shortly with adjective clauses have relative pronouns. But we'll get there. Let's look at number 2. Rex barked because he hates the mailman. So we should already know right away, Rex barked is our independent clause, right? And it's the same even for number 3, Rex barked. Then we have our dependent clauses, which are adverbs as well, because he hates the mailman. Now, look at after the mailman left, look at because he hates the mailman. Both of these have subjects and verbs. The mailman, in the first one, after the mailman left, the mailman is the subject, left is the verb. Because he hates the mailman, he is the subject, hates is the verb, the mailman is our direct object. Then we have until the sun went down. Now, what question does because he hates the mailman and until the sun went down answer? Because he hates the mailman is obviously answering why. Why is it that he barked? Because he hates the mailman. We already said after the mailman left was when. But what about the third one? Until the sun went down. Here we could probably say when, or even how. How did he bark? Until the sun went down, but maybe when is more like it. So again, until the sun went down, we have the subject, the sun, and then went is the verb. So this is definitely a clause, but it can't stand alone. Until the sun went down If I just say that, it's not a complete sentence. Let's look at number 4. If he does not stop barking, Rex will be very sorry. Now, where is the independent clause? Where is the dependent clause? Which one can stand alone? Rex will be very sorry is the independent clause. It can stand alone. That's a complete sentence. Rex will be very sorry. We haven't, if you just took it as a sentence by itself, it hasn't stated why he's sorry, but it is a complete sentence. Whereas if we look, if he does not stop barking, ask yourself, is that a complete sentence? If he does not stop barking, are you waiting for something? If he does not stop barking is a dependent clause. It can't stand alone. Now, what question does it ask? Probably how is the closest that we're going to get. And she will mention this later on. Now, let's look at number 5 as well. Since Rex started barking, 3 people have called. Where is the independent clause, the one that can stand alone? 3 people have called. That right there can be a sentence all on its own. 3 people have called, period. I don't need to say anything else. The rest of the paragraph that it's in can give more information. But look at since Rex started barking. Is that a complete sentence? Since Rex started barking? No. You're waiting. Since Rex started barking, what? So that's our dependent clause. Notice that both 4 and 5 begin with dependent clauses. And what comes after the dependent clause when it begins a sentence? This is very important. The comma. So the rule is, if you have a dependent clause beginning a sentence, then you must have a comma after it. And this makes the adverb clause, the dependent clause that's acting as an adverb, just like any other adverb. For we know that single word adverbs and phrases that are adverbs can move to the front of a sentence. So now she gives us 4 points, 4 observations really on these adverb clauses. If you were playing detective, what could you learn about adverb clauses from those 5 sentences? Go back and study them some more, which we've done. You may wish to diagram them, and so you should also diagram these. Adverb clauses answer why and some other strange things. What question does if answer? It tells something like under what circumstances. Under what circumstances is, in effect, answering the question how. Remember, any weird adverbs, just go with how and you'll most likely get the question right. Okay, so let's scroll down. 2, adverb clauses are introduced by a connecting word. These sentences had after, because, until, if, and since. These connecting words are subordinating conjunctions. If you see a subordinating conjunction, you have an adverb clause. If you see a subordinating conjunction, you have an adverb clause. Adverb clauses, like other adverbs, may move to the front of the sentence. Sentences 4 and 5, the adverb clauses came first. When the adverb clause comes first, it is followed by a comma. Very important rule. If you begin with an independent clause and then have the adverb clause, there is no comma. Just like here, Rex barked after the mailman came. Now, there's something a little tricky with subordinating conjunctions, because sometimes a subordinating conjunction can be a preposition. And this is the case with many words. And when we are trying to figure out what part of speech they are, they can often change depending on how they act in the sentence. So she says, that is what you could have observed from the 5 examples. Did you find it all? Did you find anything else? You might have noticed that after is sometimes a preposition. Compare these 2. Rex ran after the ball. Rex barked after the mailman came. So here, after the ball. That after there is a preposition, whereas here, after the mailman came, is a subordinating conjunction. So here's the question. How do we distinguish between the two? It's pretty simple. After the ball, what is that? It's a prepositional phrase. So after must be a preposition. We have the object of the preposition, ball, and we don't have anything else. There's no verb, right? Remember what we went over in the last section on distinguishing between phrases and clauses. So this is a phrase. So after must then be a preposition. But then look at the second one. Rex barked after the mailman came. After the mailman came is preceding, it comes before a subject and a verb. The mailman is our subject, came is the verb. So if that's the case, we have a clause because we have a subject and a verb. But after the mailman came doesn't stand alone. It's acting as an adverb, so it's an adverb clause. So after must be a subordinating conjunction. So there are two ways of kind of going about identifying adverb clauses. One is to say, I see a subordinating conjunction. Therefore, this must be a adverb clause. But you should double check, make sure it actually is a subordinating conjunction and is actually a clause. The other way to go about it is to say, okay, where we have a subject, we have a verb, it doesn't stand alone, and it's modifying Bart. And what question is it answering after the mailman came? It's answering the question when. Therefore, it's an adverb. So those are the two kind of directions you can go about it. The first after is a preposition. The second after is a subordinating conjunction introducing an adverb clause. There are many, many subordinating conjunctions. You can make your own list by seeing how many words make sense on the conjunction line. A dotted line joining the word, the clause modifies, and the adverb clause itself. So if we look, they left, some subordinating conjunction, it rained. They left after it rained, when it rained, whenever it rained, because it rained, since it rained, if it rained, they left, right? You can use a lot of different subordinating conjunctions with that sentence. So there are a lot to kind of go over. The list would be not a waste of time, but would be very beneficial at this point. You can look up lists online. But what is a subordinating conjunction? We talked about it earlier in the previous lesson, but the word subordinating means making something of a lower rank. Like I mentioned, an army officer and his subordinates, the men under his command. Or you have a general and his chief of staff is under him and handles his other subordinates. See what subordinating conjunctions do to these sentences. So here we have 4 sentences. Really, there are actually 4 sentences, but she has made it so that the independent clause is a single sentence, and then the dependent clause, the adverb clause, is just kind of standing alone there. So where are independent clauses? The mailman came, he left, Nellie caught the ball, you don't pay attention. And then we have the subordinating conjunctions, the dependent clauses that come after. The mailman came when the mailman came, right? So as soon as you add this when here, this now becomes a dependent clause. So the mailman came is our independent clause. But when I add when to it, it makes it dependent. And it's answering the question, when. So it would, if it were put into another sentence with an independent clause, be an adverb clause. He left, number 2, after he left. Again, this is stating when. So he was happy after he left. So that's stating when. It's an adverb clause. Nellie caught the ball. Because Nellie caught the ball. This is answering why. You don't pay attention. If you don't pay attention, right? This is answering how. So when I add these subordinating conjunctions, it makes what used to be an independent clause, it makes it into a dependent clause. And so that's very important to pay attention to. The first group in each case can stand alone. We saw that those are independent sentences. We may desire more information about the sentence he left, but we will be satisfied to wait for another sentence to find out when, why, etc. And so that's important. There's a difference between something standing alone grammatically and something standing alone in its meaning. Right? They're very closely related, but the mailman came, or he left. He left. If I just said that in conversation, if I came up to you randomly in the street and said he left, you would wonder, who are you talking about? Who are you coming up to me on the street? Right? That requires more information, but that's not what we're talking about. As a sentence, he left is a complete sentence. Its meaning is complete in and of itself. It has a subject and a verb. It can stand alone as a complete unit, as a sentence. Sure, when speaking to someone, you need more meaning, okay? But that's not what we're talking about here when we're dealing with dependent and independent clauses. But suppose someone comes into the room and says any of those second parts. You want to know, well, what? And so this is key. You are waiting for something when someone says, when the mailman came, after he left, because Nelly caught the ball, if you don't pay attention. You are waiting for some more information about that sentence in order for it to be complete. You actually feel a type of unsettledness hearing it. What happened when the mailman came? What happened after he left? The addition of just one word, the subordinating conjunction, made us aware that the idea in the clause was not complete, that the main information was missing. So we have seen that a subordinating conjunction subordinates. It makes something dependent on another, right? We also know that a conjunction joins. Remember the definition, a conjunction joins two words, phrases, or clauses. Do you remember learning this way back? Right now, so the subordinating conjunctions are only going to join clauses to one another. They don't join words or phrases. So there are two kinds of conjunctions: coordinating, which joins two equal words, phrases, or clauses, and then subordinating. Now the subordinating, she's going to give us the definition, introduces an adverb clause and joins it to a main clause. So introduces an adverb clause and joins it to a main clause. That is our definition for subordinating conjunction. Now there's one exercise on subordinating conjunctions here, on subordinating conjunctions and adverb clauses. And you can go to the video on exercise 4.1 for an explanation of each one of these. Next, we're going to cover elliptical clauses, which are somewhat difficult, but hopefully with explanation, they won't be too difficult for you.